Looking back, I should have trusted my gut from the very beginning. But desperation has a way of clouding your judgment, doesn't it? After 6 grueling months of unemployment, countless rejections, and a stack of bills that seemed to grow taller by the day, I was ready to take just about any job that came my way. So when the offer from Cipher Technologies landed in my inbox, it felt like a lifeline. A way out of the suffocating financial quicksand I'd been slowly sinking into. The pay was good. Suspiciously good if I'm being honest. But I chalked that up to my own insecurities. After all, I had a solid background in IT, even if my last gig ended unceremoniously. No need to get into that now. The point is, I was qualified, and Cipher Technologies seemed legit. A mid-sized tech company specializing in data encryption and storage solutions. Nothing too flashy, but stable. Safe. God, how wrong I was. The morning of my first day dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind racing with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. As I stood in front of my closet deliberating over which shirt screamed, "Competent new hire" the loudest, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, a few more gray hairs at my temples than I remembered. I looked tired, worn down. But hey, this job was going to change all that, right? I arrived at the Cipher Technologies building 15 minutes early, not wanting to risk being late on my first day. The structure itself was unremarkable. A squat 6-story office building made of glass and steel, indistinguishable from the dozens of others in this part of the city. But as I approached the entrance, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a face in one of the upper windows. Pale, distorted, pressed against the glass as if trying to break through. I blinked and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Nerves playing tricks on me. The lobby was all sleek modernity. Polished floors, minimalist furniture, and a reception desk manned by a woman with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new IT specialist," she said, her voice devoid of any real warmth. "Mr. Reeves is expecting you. 5th floor, end of the hall." As I rode the elevator up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. The doors opened with a soft ding, revealing a long corridor lined with identical white doors. At the far end, a man was waiting, tall and lanky, with thinning hair and thick-rimmed glasses. He extended a hand as I approached. "Ah, new recruit," he said, his grip uncomfortably firm. "Welcome to Cipher Technologies. I'm Jonathan Reeves, head of IT operations. We're so glad you've joined our family." There was something in the way he said family that made my skin crawl. But I pushed the feeling aside. This was a fresh start, a chance to get back on my feet. I wasn't about to let some baseless paranoia ruin it. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," I replied, mustering up as much enthusiasm as I could. "I'm excited to get started." He nodded, a thin smile playing at his lips. "Oh, I'm sure you are. Now, let me give you the grand tour." As we walked through the office, everything looked normal enough. Rows of cubicles, the hum of computers, and the faint smell of coffee in the air. My new coworkers barely looked up as we passed, their eyes fixed on their screens with an intensity that seemed off somehow. We reached a heavy metal door at the end of a long hallway. Mr. Reeves gestured towards it with a flourish. "And this," he said, "is our server room. It's strictly off-limits to all but our senior technicians." He chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Huh, wouldn't want any newbies messing with our precious data, right?" I nodded, trying to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. There was something about that door that made me uneasy. It looked a lot more like it belonged in a high-security prison than an IT company. Thick, reinforced, with multiple lock mechanisms visible. What kind of data were they storing that required this level of security? Of course, I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. I understand. Mr. Reeves clapped me on the shoulder, his hand lingering a moment too long. Good man. Now, let's get you set up at your workstation. I have a feeling you're going to fit right in here. As we walked away, I couldn't help but glance back at the server room door. For a split second, I could have sworn I heard something. A faint tapping sound, like someone knocking from the other side. But that was impossible, right? It was just my imagination running wild on my first day of work. It had to be. Because the alternative, well, I wasn't ready to consider that just yet. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my nightmare at Cipher Technologies. The first week went by without incident. I settled into my cubicle, familiarizing myself with the company's systems. My co-workers were friendly enough, though they kept to themselves most of the time. It wasn't until Friday afternoon that things started to get weird. I was working late, trying to finish up a project. The office was nearly empty, just me and a few other night owls. That's when I heard it. A faint but distinct knocking sound. At first I thought it was just the building settling, old pipes maybe. But as the minutes ticked by, the knocking grew louder and more insistent. It seemed to be coming from down the hall. Curious, I got up and followed the sound. My footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as I made my way towards the source. With each step, the knocking grew louder until I found myself standing in front of the server room door. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was definitely coming from inside. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the cold metal. That's when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A muffled scream. Human. Desperate. Terrified. I jumped back, my mind reeling. What the hell was going on in there? I reached for the door handle, but it was locked tight. I rattled it frantically, shouting, "Hello? Is someone in there? Do you need help?" The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, just as suddenly, the knocking resumed, louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to break out. I stumbled backwards, my legs shaking. I had to get out of there. I ran back to my cubicle, grabbed my things, and bolted for the exit. As I left, I could have sworn I heard laughter coming from Mr. Reeves' office. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing those screams, that desperate knocking. What was behind that door? And more importantly, what kind of company had I gotten myself involved with? The weekend crawled by in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. By Monday morning, I'd almost convinced myself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. As I walked into the office, the receptionist's plastic smile seemed more sinister than ever. "Good morning," she chirped, her eyes cold and empty. "Mr. Reeves would like to see you in his office right away." My stomach dropped. This was it. They knew I'd heard something. I was about to be fired. Or worse. Mr. Reeves was waiting for me. His thin lips curved into what I suppose was meant to be a smile. "Ah, there you are. How was your first week with us?" I swallowed hard. "It was interesting, sir." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "Interesting how?" For a moment, I considered telling him everything, but something in his gaze stopped me. "Just getting used to the new systems," I lied. "There's a lot to learn." He nodded slowly. "Indeed there is. More than you can imagine." He paused, studying me. "You were here quite late on Friday, weren't you?" My heart hammered in my chest. "Yes, sir. Just wanted to finish up a project." "Admirable dedication," he said, though his tone suggested anything but admiration. "But in the future, I'd prefer if you stuck to regular hours. We value work-life balance here at Cypher." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Of course, sir. It won't happen again." As I turned to leave, he called out, "Oh, and one more thing. Stay away from the server room. It's sensitive equipment in there. Wouldn't want any accidents." I mumbled in agreement and practically fled from his office. As I settled into my cubicle, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every time I glanced up, I caught my coworkers quickly averting their eyes. The constant tap, tap, tap of keyboards felt oppressive, almost mocking. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the office grew increasingly tense. Whispered conversations would abruptly cease when I approached. Twice, I caught groups of coworkers huddled around computer screens, looking at something they quickly minimized when they noticed me. And then there was the server room. I swear the knocking got louder every day. Sometimes, late in the afternoon when the office grew quiet, I could hear what sounded like sobbing coming from behind that heavy door. But every time I worked up the courage to investigate, someone would suddenly appear, steering me away with a too bright smile and an inane question about work. It was driving me insane. I needed answers. I knew I should report this to the authorities. But who would believe me? A story about people trapped in secret rooms used as human computers? They'd think I was insane. And if Cypher Technologies really had the processing power Mr. Reeves claimed, they'd be able to intercept any calls or emails I sent out. No. If I wanted answers, if I wanted to help those people, I had to do this myself. The guilt of walking away, of leaving those people to suffer, would haunt me forever. I had to at least try to uncover the truth, to gather some evidence. Maybe then someone would listen to me. So I made a plan. I'd stay late again, but this time, I'd be prepared. One night, about 2 weeks after the initial incident, I decided to stay late again. Mr. Reeves' warning be damned. I waited until the office emptied out, pretending to be engrossed in my work. As the last person left, calling out a cheery, "Don't work too hard," I began my investigation. First, I tried to access the company's personnel files. If someone was trapped in that room, surely there'd be a record of missing employees. But every time I tried to open the database, I got an "access denied" message. Frustrated, I turned to the internet, searching for any news about disappearances in the area. Nothing. I was so engrossed in my research that I almost missed the sound of footsteps approaching. Panicking, I quickly closed all the windows and pretended to be shutting down my computer. "Working late again, I see." Mr. Reeves' voice made me jump. He was standing at the entrance to my cubicle, his face hidden in shadow. "I thought we discussed this." "I'm sorry, sir," I stammered. "I was just leaving." He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of something odd. A metallic smell, like copper or blood. "You know, curiosity can be a dangerous thing," he said softly. "Especially here." Before I could respond, a piercing scream echoed through the office. It was coming from the server room, louder and clearer than ever before. Mr. Reeves' head snapped towards the sound, his face contorting with rage. "Damn it!" he snarled, all pretense of friendliness gone. He grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "Come with me, now!" As he dragged me towards the server room, my mind raced. What was behind that door? What had I gotten myself into? And most terrifyingly, what was going to happen to me now? The knocking grew louder, more frantic. Mr. Reeves pulled out a keycard, his hand shaking as he swiped it through the reader. The lock clicked open, and he shoved me forward. "Time for you to learn the truth about Cipher Technologies," he growled, pushing the heavy door open. The stench hit me first, a nauseating mix of sweat, blood, and something else I couldn't quite place. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I felt the floor drop from beneath me. This wasn't a server room. It was a nightmare made real. Rows upon rows of glass cylinders lined the walls, each filled with a viscous, slightly glowing liquid. And in each cylinder, oh God, people. Dozens of them, men, women, some who looked barely out of their teens. Their eyes were closed, bodies suspended in the fluid, with countless wires and tubes connected to their heads and limbs. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mr. Reeves' voice dripped with a sick pride. He strode into the room, running his hand lovingly along one of the cylinders. "The future of computing, right here in this room." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the cold metal door. What is this? What have you done to these people?" He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. "Done? My dear boy, we've elevated them. Imagine the processing power of the human brain multiplied by hundreds. No computer on Earth can match it." You're using people as computers?" I choked out, bile rising in my throat. "Not just using them. We've created a neural interface that directly connects human brains to our quantum computing network," he explained, his voice filled with twisted excitement. "The fluid they're suspended in enhances synaptic connections, allowing us to overclock the brain's natural processing capabilities. Each person becomes a living, breathing supercomputer, able to process data at speeds that would make NASA's best machines look like pocket calculators." A scream tore through the room, making me jump. In one of the cylinders, a woman's eyes had snapped open. She thrashed against her restraints, bubbles streaming from her mouth as she tried to scream. Mr. Reeves sighed, pulling out a small remote. "Always a few glitches in the system. The human mind occasionally rebels against its new purpose." He pressed a button, and the woman went still, her eyes rolling back in her head. A small electrical stimulation to reset the neural pathways. Crude, but effective. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Reeves laughed, the sound echoing off the glass cylinders. "Why? For power, of course. With this kind of processing capability, we can break any encryption, predict stock markets, even influence elections. The possibilities are endless." He stepped closer, that sickening smile still plastered on his face. "And now, it's your turn to join our little family. Don't worry, the initial integration process is only mostly painful." As he reached for me, survival instinct kicked in. I ducked under his arm and ran deeper into the room, desperately looking for another way out. The knocking sound that had haunted me for weeks was all around now. The people in the cylinder slamming their fists against the glass in a desperate bid for freedom. I weaved between the rows of cylinders, Mr. Reeves hot on my heels. "There's nowhere to run!" he shouted. "You'll only make this harder on yourself." At the far end of the room, I spotted a control panel. Rows of switches and buttons glowed in the dim light. Without thinking, I lunged for it, my hand slamming down on the largest red button I could see. Alarms blared. Red warning lights began to flash. Around the room, cylinders started to drain, their occupants stirring to life. "No!" Mr. Reeves screamed, rushing towards the panel. Do you have any idea what you've done? Before he could reach me, one of the cylinders shattered. A man stumbled out, coughing and sputtering. Then another broke, and another. Chaos erupted. Confused, terrified people were emerging from their prisons, some collapsing to the floor, others lashing out in panic. Mr. Reeves was suddenly swarmed by a group of them, disappearing under a tangle of flailing limbs and screams of rage. I used the distraction to make a break for the door. As I ran, I could hear shouting from the hallway. The rest of the staff must have been alerted by the alarms. I had to get out of there fast. Sprinting down the corridor, I headed for the stairs, not trusting the elevator. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit and what might have been gunshots. My lungs burned as I flew down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. I burst out of the stairwell into the lobby, startling the night security guard. Before he could react, I was out of the front door and into the cool night air. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed on a park bench miles away. As I sat there, gasping for breath, my mind reeled. What the hell had I just witnessed? What was I going to do now? One thing was certain. My life would never be the same. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrifying thought surfaced. Was this really over? Or had I just made some very powerful enemies? As sirens wailed in the distance, I realized my nightmare was far from over. It was only just beginning. It's been 3 months since that night at Cipher Technologies. 3 months of looking over my shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound, and waking up in cold sweats from nightmares filled with glowing cylinders and muffled screams. The day after my escape, the news was flooded with reports about Cipher. Tech company raided and human trafficking bust, the headline screamed. The official story was that Cipher had been luring in skilled workers and selling them overseas. It was horrific, sure, but nowhere near the truth. I watched, sick to my stomach, as they brought out body bag after body bag. Many of the processors didn't survive the sudden disconnection from the system. Those who did were rushed to hospitals, babbling incoherently about numbers and codes and things no human mind was meant to process. Mr. Reeves was among the dead. The official report said he was trampled in the chaos. I knew better, but who would believe me? I've tried to move on, to forget, but how do you forget something like that? The police questioned me, of course. I told them I was just a new hire, that I had no idea what was going on in that room. Technically true, I suppose. They seemed to buy it, or at least they didn't have any evidence to suggest otherwise. I found a new job, a small IT firm on the other side of the city. It's mind-numbingly boring work, but after Cipher, boring is exactly what I need. Still, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Last week, I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw a familiar face across the street. It was one of my old coworkers from Cipher, the one who always seemed to appear when I got too close to the server room. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he ducked into an alley. I ran after him, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. Then there were the emails. They started showing up in my inbox about a month ago. No subject line, no text in the body. Just attachments, strings of binary code that made no sense to me. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I swear I can hear a faint knocking coming from my computer. The news has moved on, as it always does. Cipher Technologies is old news now. Filed away as just another corporate scandal. But I know the truth. I know what they were really doing in that room. And I can't help but wonder, was Cipher really the only one? Are there other companies out there turning human beings into living computers? I've thought about going public, telling the whole story. But who would believe me? And more importantly, who might come after me if I did? I've seen what they're capable of. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to face that again. So I keep my head down. I go to work, I come home, I try to live a normal life. But every time I pass a tech company, every time I see a help wanted sign in a window, I wonder, and I remember. The nightmares are getting worse. Sometimes I'm back in that room, but I'm the one in the cylinder. I can feel the wires burrowing into my skull, can feel my thoughts being twisted and pulled in 1,000 directions at once. I wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat. Other times, I dream that I never left, that my escape was just another simulation, a test run in the vast network of enslaved minds. In those dreams, I open my eyes to find myself still suspended in that glowing liquid, the real world nothing but a fading memory. I've started seeing a therapist. I can't tell her the whole truth, of course, but just having someone to talk to helps. She thinks I'm suffering from some sort of PTSD, probably from the traumatic events at my old job. If only she knew. Yesterday, I saw a flyer for a new tech startup in town. Revolutionizing the future of AI, it proclaimed. My blood ran cold. The logo looked familiar. A stylized cipher, not unlike the one I'd seen every day for those few weeks at Cipher Technologies. It could be a coincidence. It probably is. But I can't take that chance. Especially not after what I found last week. I couldn't help myself. I started digging, looking into other tech companies, especially ones that seemed to appear out of nowhere with breakthrough technologies. And I found patterns, employees disappearing, unexplained leaps in processing capabilities, strange power consumption rates. It's not just Cipher. They're everywhere, hidden in plain sight, building their networks of human processors. How deep does it go? Government contracts? Military applications? The possibilities are terrifying. I've compiled everything I found onto an encrypted drive. If anything happens to me, it'll be automatically uploaded to every major news outlet and tech watchdog group I could find. It's not much, but it's something. A failsafe. A warning. I'm leaving town tonight. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay here. I've got some money saved up, enough to disappear for a while. I'll find somewhere quiet, somewhere off the grid. Somewhere they can't find me. Because I know they're still out there. The ones who escaped. The ones who weren't caught in the raid. And they haven't given up. They're rebuilding, regrouping, and sooner or later, they'll come looking for the one who ruined their plans. So if you're listening to this, consider it a warning. Be careful what jobs you take. Be wary of too-good-to-be-true offers from tech companies you've never heard of. And if you ever hear knocking coming from a room you're not allowed to enter, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because in this brave new world of ours, you never know when you might become just another cog in the machine. Literally. As for me, well, I'll keep running, keep hiding, and hope that someday the knocking in my nightmares will finally fall silent. But deep down, I know the truth. In this digital age, there's nowhere left to hide.